From Morty nearly destroying the timeline over a crush, to Rick inventing an entire multiverse just to avoid being wrong. This is the full breakdown of how smart every character is in Rick and Morty, ranked from Jerry to smartest. Starting with Jerry Smith. He's never been the smartest person in the room, but he's too oblivious to ever notice that. While everyone else in the Rick and Morty universe struggles with the mind-bending complexities of interdimensional travel, Jerry's biggest challenge is figuring out how to use a Meeseeks box without causing a citywide hostage situation. His life represents one long, unbroken streak of self-sabotage. In a universe where Rick Sanchez can create entire civilizations and Morty has developed survival instincts to navigate cosmic horrors, Jerry is spectacularly and almost impressively incompetent at the most mundane tasks. From the very beginning of Rick and Morty, Jerry Smith was established as the family's weak link. He's known for struggling with employment and failing to connect with his family, but he's also capable of heroism in times of crisis. In fact, he's saved his family on rare occasions. Jerry's nature to give up in tough situations became problematic when he asked a blue humanoid creature to help him improve his golf game. And upon realizing that he was bad at golf, he quit trying to pursue his goals. This could also possibly be the reason why Jerry can't get a job or can't keep a job for a long time, because he always gives up halfway. The Meeseeks were specifically designed to help people with simple tasks. Rick warned the Smith family to keep their tasks simple because if a Meeseeks isn't given a purpose at the beginning of its existence, it seems to default to taking the purpose of the Meeseeks before it. Beth asks her Meeseeks to help her be a more complete woman. Summer wants to become popular at school, but Jerry asks for something more straightforward, taking 2 strokes off his golf game. What should have been the simplest request becomes an existential nightmare that threatens the entire family's safety because being bad at golf and his unwillingness to practice made for an impossible combination. This was the moment when Jerry's fundamental misunderstanding of cause and effect became a life-threatening situation for everyone around him. What follows is one of the most chaotic sequences in Rick and Morty history, and it's all Jerry's fault. However, Jerry struggles to improve at golf despite the coaching from his Meeseeks. Jerry is ready to give up, but his Meeseeks can't stop existing until it completes its task and decides to summon another Meeseeks to help. The situation spirals completely out of control, as Jerry's refusal to acknowledge his own limitations creates a multiplying crisis as Mr. Meeseeks hits the button on the Meeseeks box and another Mr. Meeseeks appears. The beautiful irony here is that Jerry actually admits he sucks, but instead of working to improve, he just accepts it as an immutable fact of the universe. The longer the Meeseeks stay alive, the more sanity they begin to lose. And Jerry, being Jerry, doesn't seem to grasp the urgency of the situation. While Beth and Summer's Meeseeks complete their tasks and disappear within hours, Jerry's incompetence creates what amounts to an interdimensional mental health crisis. When Jerry decides he's had enough and leaves the increasingly desperate Meeseeks to go to dinner with Beth, the situation reaches its most ridiculous point. Jerry goes to dinner with Beth, telling the whining Meeseeks that they are more worried about his golf game than he is. This is peak Jerry. Create a problem, make it worse through negligence, then wash his hands of responsibility when things spiral out of control. The climax was when the Meeseeks stormed the restaurant where Jerry and Beth were dining, driven to complete madness by him. The horde of Mr. Meeseeks descend on the restaurant while Jerry and Beth escape into the restaurant's freezer, and the Mr. Meeseeks begin taking hostages to force him out. The man who couldn't improve his golf swing by 2 strokes has now created a hostage situation. So he does the most Jerry thing ever and asks why he's mediocre, as if it's something that happened to him rather than because of who he is as a person. The resolution comes when Jerry finally demonstrates that his golf swing has improved by using a makeshift setup in the restaurant. Jerry comes out from the freezer and uses a severed pipe and tomato to prove that his swing has improved. The Mr. Meeseeks celebrate and disappear, all except for one stickler Mr. Meeseeks who takes a hostage and asks to see Jerry's short game. But Jerry couldn't quite get it right because there's always one more thing he hasn't considered. The family's reaction tells us everything we need to know about Jerry's place in their world. They went crazy when they couldn't take 2 strokes off Jerry's golf game. He felt terrible, and Rick's dismissal cut straight to the point by saying it's simply factual. Jerry's incompetence is so well established that nearly causing multiple deaths over golf lessons barely registers as unusual. The Meeseeks incident pretty much covers Jerry's role throughout the series. His fundamental problem is that he overthinks simple things while completely missing complex realities. He can intellectualize the concept of relaxation being paradoxical, but he can't grasp that asking magical creatures to fix his golf game might have consequences. This pattern repeats throughout the series. When the Galactic Federation took over Earth and humanity slipped into full-blown dystopia, Jerry Smith saw an opportunity to climb the corporate ladder instead of protecting his family. Instead of asking why the aliens wanted him or what they planned to do with humanity, Jerry leaned into the fantasy that he was finally special. His unemployment becomes a recurring theme that illustrates his approach to problem-solving perfectly. He can never seem to catch a break or a job. However, one theory suggests that it's possible his specific job in the Galactic Federation contributed to his inability to find work on Earth. Essentially, because of Jerry's background in marketing, the Galactic Federation used this to its advantage to create content for the masses. In the episode Something Ricked This Way Comes, Jerry's insecurities lead to helping his son Morty on a science project, to which he stubbornly refuses to concede that Pluto is no longer a planet. This ends up with him and Morty being abducted to Pluto. Jerry's scientific method was, if experts disagree with what makes him feel good, the experts must be wrong.
That's right. It's possible to disagree in science, Morty. Pluto was a planet. Some committee of fancy assholes disagree. I disagree back.
Jerry's defining trait is that he doesn't ask questions because answers might ruin the fantasy. When faced with a talking cat that clearly has disturbing secrets, Jerry didn't panic or call for help. He didn't even ask how or why the cat could speak. He just accepted it and agreed to go on a spontaneous vacation to Florida. Later, when Rick scanned the cat's mind and saw something so horrifying he could barely speak, Jerry didn't want to know. He willingly had the memory wiped because he couldn't handle the discomfort of knowing the truth. This demonstrates what makes Jerry the dumbest character in Rick and Morty. He thinks being chosen means being right. He thinks doing nothing is the safest move. And worst of all, he thinks failure is just bad luck and never his own fault. Jerry consistently chooses comfort over growth, validation over truth, and denial over self-reflection. Jerry's episode with the Meeseeks is one of the show's most perfect character studies that shows exactly how someone can turn a simple request into a life-threatening disaster through sheer incompetence. His estimated IQ, 85. Below average intelligence combined with absolute zero self-awareness and a pathological aversion to learning. Jerry represents the dangerous intersection of stupidity and stubborn confidence. If this is how low the bar starts, just wait till we get to the characters who think cloning themselves makes them emotionally stable. Hit subscribe now if you're buckled in. But his journey from unemployment to cosmic irrelevance is just getting started. Because next up, we have a character who might actually be smart enough to recognize their own limitations, unlike our poor, oblivious Jerry. Mr. Poopy Butthole. The more you look at him, the more it becomes clear that Mr. Poopy Butthole is a sight for sore eyes. This character exists to react. He pops in, screams something cheerful, gets shot, and then vanishes until the next cameo. But if you string his choices together long enough, it reveals a pattern of the kind of impulsive behavior we can only expect from Rick. Mr. Poopy Butthole operates like someone reading cue cards for the first time, drifting through dangerous situations without understanding the stakes. He survives by accident and collapses the moment anyone asks him to take initiative. His defining characteristic shows his complete inability to plan ahead or learn from catastrophic experiences. Wayne Poopy Butthole, more commonly referred to as Mr. Poopy Butthole and formerly Professor Poopy Butthole, is a longtime family friend of the Smith family and a recurring character in Rick and Morty. He's mostly shown breaking the fourth wall during the show and is the only other character to do this besides Rick and others on certain occasions. He often addresses the audience in post-credit scenes following a season finale, where he talks about what just happened in the episode as well as his personal life before encouraging the audience to tune in for the next season. What makes Mr. Poopy Butthole fascinating is how he processes trauma and crisis. Rather than developing coping mechanisms or learning from experiences, he simply resets his emotional state and soldiers on as if nothing fundamental has changed. His happy-go-lucky personality stays the same throughout the series, suggesting either profound wisdom or complete disconnection from reality. The perfect example of Mr. Poopy Butthole's reactive stupidity comes from the Total Recall episode, where the family faces an invasion of memory-implanting parasites. The Smith household becomes ground zero for distinguishing between real family friends and alien threats who plant false memories. The tension builds as paranoia spreads and family members start killing anyone who seems too good to be true. Beth becomes increasingly suspicious. Rick arms everyone, and the situation escalates toward violence. Mr. Poopy Butthole exists right in the middle of this chaos, cheerful and familiar, but somehow off. You could even assume he's another parasite because he appears too perfectly placed to be coincidental. The setup makes him look like an obvious target for elimination, especially when everyone else is being systematically murdered for being suspicious. During the lockdown, Mr. Poopy Butthole shows no awareness of the danger surrounding him. Rick presses a button on his watch, and all doors and windows in the house are sealed off by blast shields. Instead of recognizing this as a life-threatening situation, Mr. Poopy Butthole treats it like a minor inconvenience. His response to being trapped during a parasite hunt demonstrates how disconnected he really is from reality. While everyone else is getting paranoid, Mr. Poopy Butthole is still obliviously cheerful while also sharing irrelevant memories and making himself seem even more suspicious. At this point, Beth was convinced that Mr. Poopy Butthole must be a parasite, so she shoots him point blank. Photos become the family's method for determining who's real, and when Beth scrolls through her images, she discovers that Mr. Poopy Butthole isn't in any of the photos. This should have been his moment to explain, to provide evidence, to save himself through quick thinking. Instead, Mr. Poopy Butthole turns the accusation around without understanding that he's making himself look even more suspicious by telling her that she's not in any of his either, essentially confirming Beth's suspicion, so she brings out one of Rick's laser weapons and shoots Mr. Poopy Butthole in the midsection, which throws him over the room onto a wall. The family freaks out as he starts bleeding, proving he wasn't a parasite. This scene shows exactly how Mr. Poopy Butthole operates. He drifts through dangerous situations without understanding the consequences. He had no plan for surviving a parasite hunt, no strategy for proving he's not one of them, and no awareness that being the most suspicious-looking person in the room might get him shot. After the credits, we see Mr. Poopy Butthole recovering inside the hospital, and rather than demanding justice, pressing charges, or even seeking an explanation for why Beth shot him, Mr. Poopy Butthole simply forgives them and moves on. His immediate reaction to trauma shows the reactive nature that defines his entire existence. His entire story arc reveals the fundamental limitation of reactive intelligence. After being absent for several seasons, Mr. Poopy Butthole returns with a cane, a limp, and a family we've never seen before. He talks about his downfall, casually revealing that he lost his job, got addicted to pills, and drove his wife and son away. The weird part is that he blames the audience. No one asked for this update, but he just appears, spills his guts to the camera, and then disappears again. The pattern continues in almost every appearance. In Season 4, he appears as Professor Poopy Butthole in front of a small gathering of college students. They all attack him almost right away, and we see an incredible display of agile martial arts as he dodges punches in slow motion and brutally defeats them all with his cane. His Season 7 appearance shows complete deterioration, though. Mr. Poopy Butthole shows up completely unhinged, openly suicidal, and clinging to whatever scraps of meaning he can find. He takes a job teaching, gets fired, and blames everyone but himself. The fact that he narrates his own misery demonstrates how disconnected he becomes from cause and effect. Mr. Poopy Butthole's sudden selfishness in Season 7 possibly comes from the fact that he's probably the variant from the Parmesan dimension rather than the same character we've been following. The most telling aspect of his character development shows his complete inability to break destructive cycles. Each appearance follows the same pattern. He arrives cheerfully, gets caught up in circumstances beyond his control, suffers consequences, and then processes the trauma as if it happened to someone else. His relationship with the fourth wall breaking reveals another one of his limitations. Mr. Poopy Butthole often addresses the audience in post-credit scenes, but unlike Rick's sophisticated meta-commentary, his observations are surface level and disconnected from deeper understanding. He means well and suffers genuinely, but lacks the intelligence to protect himself or improve his circumstances. It's almost like watching someone try to navigate a hurricane with an umbrella while being unprepared for the reality he's facing. Mr. Poopy Butthole's estimated IQ, 88, capable of basic social interaction and surprisingly effective in physical confrontations, but completely unable to anticipate consequences or learn from repeated trauma. His reactive intelligence keeps him going, but he's never safe. He's brilliantly incompetent, at least when compared to our next character, who somehow manages to make wrong decisions even when handed the right answers. Beth Smith. Her intelligence exists beyond question. She's one of the smartest people in the family. She's a trained surgeon, a confident leader, and quick to assert dominance in almost any conversation. But intelligence alone doesn't lead to smart decisions. With Beth, her biggest flaw is how she constantly mistakes control for clarity. She doesn't want to understand the situation. She wants to win it. Most of her bad decisions come from that warped priority. Beth processes trauma by repackaging it into pride. Instead of pulling herself out of toxic situations, she digs deeper into them to prove she's strong enough to survive. That might work with horses, but it doesn't work in a family with Rick. Her intellect becomes weaponized to protect her ego rather than improve her life, creating a dangerous combination of high intelligence and complete emotional dysfunction. She's the third antagonist of Rick and Morty, the daughter of Rick C-131, Jerry's wife and Summer and Morty's mother. She also works as a veterinarian at the St. Equus Hospital, specializing in horse surgery, a job she internally feels to be beneath her and is often defensive when her career is compared to human medicine. Several episodes have dealt with Beth's deep dissatisfaction with her life, stemming from her belief that she has settled in her marriage, family, and job. As an adult, she wanted to work as a cardiac surgeon, but that never happened because she went to prom with Jerry and got pregnant with her first child and only daughter, Summer. She may wish she had been able to continue her medical education to become a real doctor, but in reality, Beth has a superiority complex. She believes she is above others as a way of hiding her insecurities. Her genius father's clear preference for her over her idiot husband, as Rick likes to put it, has in turn fed her feelings of superiority, especially towards Jerry. Beth's intelligent stupidity comes from her relationship with therapy and self-reflection for starters. In Pickle Rick, the family attends therapy without Rick, and Beth spends the entire session trying to prove that their dysfunction is sophisticated rather than harmful and just wants to win the session. Things start to escalate as Dr. Wong attempts to address the family's real problems. Beth deflects every observation about her closed-off emotional state, claiming it's better than making your problems other people's problems. When Dr. Wong suggests that Rick and Beth's shared aversion to emotion and vulnerability is at the root of the family's problems, Beth immediately goes on the defensive. Dr. Wong asks simple, leading questions about why Rick turned himself into a pickle to avoid therapy, and Beth just responds with justifications. She rationalizes the matter in order to avoid facing the painful truth that her father lied and proceeds to become hostile, treating the therapy session like a debate she needs to win at all costs. Beth's response tells you everything about who she is. Beth fails to consider her similarities with Rick and gets more defensive of Rick when Dr. Wong points out how Rick uses his intelligence to avoid getting in touch with his emotional side. This exchange shows Beth's fundamental problem. She confuses emotional unavailability with strength. Her intelligence tells her that Rick's behavior is destructive, but her emotional needs override her rational assessment. She chooses to admire Rick's toxic independence because acknowledging his dysfunction would mean confronting her own. When Dr. Wong finishes her analysis of Rick's pattern of using intelligence to justify avoiding emotional work, Rick stays silent and actually processes the feedback. But Beth just ignores the entire session. After they leave, she and Rick mock Dr. Wong and make plans to go drinking, completely ignoring Morty and Summer's advice of returning to therapy. The pattern continues in The ABCs of Beth, where Rick reveals her childhood sociopathic tendencies. Beth's response reveals her intelligence-driven rationalization when she is presented with proof of her unsettling childhood behavior, such as Rick's list of weapons she asked for as a child. Following the therapy session, Beth's reaction shows her complete inability to process criticism constructively. Rather than considering Dr. Wong's insights, she treats the entire experience as validation of her superiority. Her dismissal reveals how she uses her intelligence to maintain her defensive barriers. Beth's response also reveals her basic avoidance of responsibility when Rick gives her the option to clone herself and leave Earth. She agrees but deliberately chooses not to know which version stayed behind because she says it's empowering, that she trusts herself either way. But deep down, she's dodging accountability, because she would be angry at herself for being so cowardly if she knew she stayed, and she would question her parenting if she knew she had left. Not knowing gives her plausible deniability. This decision reveals Beth's intelligence working against her own growth. She's smart enough to recognize the escape route Rick offers, clever enough to structure the arrangement to protect her ego, but too emotionally stunted to make an authentic choice about her life. Beth's pattern of using intelligence to avoid emotional growth creates cascading problems throughout her relationships. Her obsession with not being like her mother leads her to repeat the exact same dysfunctional patterns. She belittles Jerry the same way her mom belittled her dad. She stays in a loveless marriage out of inertia and pride. She drinks to cope, resents her kids, and lashes out when she feels unappreciated, all while denying that anything's wrong. Her relationship with Jerry demonstrates how her intellectual superiority becomes emotional poison. Beth doesn't love Jerry. She's bored by him, frustrated with his mediocrity, and openly disgusted with his lack of courage. But every time she has the chance to leave him for good, she either hesitates or doubles back. She stays because walking away would mean admitting she wasted her youth on the wrong man, that she chose someone safe over someone challenging, that she made a mistake. When they do separate, Beth feels free for a moment but then spirals into an identity crisis. The Space Beth situation reveals the logical endpoint of her avoidance patterns. In A Rick Convenient Mort, we learn that Beth and Space Beth begin a romantic relationship with each other because they're the same person and no one else understands them. Beth is so desperate to be seen, so unwilling to admit she's emotionally isolated, that she literally starts dating herself. She justifies it as self-care, a healthy bond, and a way to feel whole. But what it really does is expose her inability to form authentic connections with others. Even when Rick endangers Morty, destabilizes their household, and reveals everything that makes her feel secure, Beth sticks by him. She defends him, excuses him, places his intellect above his destructiveness, and his approval above her own instincts. Her superiority complex, believing herself at times to be above others as a way of hiding her insecurities, creates a feedback loop where her intelligence reinforces her emotional problems rather than solving them. She confuses control with strength, refuses help because needing it would imply weakness, and surrounds herself with people she can either fix or dominate because equals would threaten her illusion of superiority. All in all, she represents the most tragic kind of wasted potential. someone brilliant enough to recognize her problems, but too emotionally damaged to fix them. It's like watching a gifted surgeon operate on everyone except herself, using all her skills to maintain the wounds that are slowly killing her. Her intelligence could be her salvation, but she's chosen pride instead. Her estimated IQ, 130, highly intelligent with strong analytical abilities and medical training, but her emotional dysfunction and pathological need for control prevent her from applying that intelligence to her own life. There's a very similar character to her with the same kind of pride, but she owns it, unlike Beth, who isn't willing to question herself. She's a surgeon with abandonment issues and a clone somewhere in orbit, and we're still only halfway up the ladder. Click subscribe before the smarter ones start destroying timelines. Space Beth. Space Beth acts like she escaped all of regular Beth's baggage, but the truth reveals she just repackaged it into aggression. She's sharper in a fight, quicker to act, and more decisive in a crisis. But where regular Beth hides behind control and pride, Space Beth hides behind motion. She solves her problems by outrunning them, blasting them, or pretending they don't exist. For someone who claims to be free, Space Beth spends a lot of time proving she's still stuck in the same psychological loops, only with cooler boots and a bigger gun. Space Beth doesn't just want to be independent, she wants to be defined by it. Every sarcastic jab and smug smile becomes another brick in the wall she's building to avoid the deeper question. If freedom made her happy, why did she come back? Because deep down, Space Beth doesn't want to be separate. She wants to be chosen. Her intelligence gets channeled into elaborate justifications for avoiding emotions that could actually free her, much like Rick. Space Beth is a major character in Rick and Morty who's either the original Beth Smith from Dimension C131 or a clone of her. At the end of the ABCs of Beth, Rick made a clone of Beth with all her memories and, unable to decide whether or not he wanted his daughter in his life, purposefully had their positions shuffled so that he himself would not know which Beth was the clone. By the time of Star-Mort Return of the Jerry, Space Beth has gone on several space adventures to reach the most wanted status in the galaxy. She returns to Earth to murder Rick for lying to her, as well as the other Beth, but Rick makes her see the other Beth has a chip too. She appears to be vengeful of her father, though her hatred seems to have toned down by the end as she returns to live with her earthly counterpart and her family. Space Beth operates like someone whose entire identity revolves around the concept of having made the right choice. She brags about saving galaxies, dismisses Earth life as meaningless, and criticizes Beth for everything from parenting to clothing. But underneath all the confidence lives someone who desperately needs to feel like the better version of Beth. She measures her value against the woman who stayed behind, treating their relationship like a competition she has to keep winning. Space Beth's intelligence-driven self-deception comes from her re-entry into Earth dynamics. In Star-Mort Return of the Jerry, Space Beth gets involved in a battle between the New Galactic Federation and Rick's family with almost no hesitation. She flies straight into chaos, confronts Rick with a gun to his face, and assumes she's being hunted, which was actually based on a handful of assumptions. When Beth, who thinks Rick doesn't want her to return, finds the explosive device in her neck, the episode takes a different turn. Rather than seeking clarification or examining the complexity of the situation, she jumps to the conclusion that she's been betrayed. This reaction shows that she sees confrontation as clarity. Space Beth's approach to family conflict shows the same pattern of just acting on it instead of asking questions. When she learns about the other Beth's similar device, instead of recognizing this as evidence of Rick's impossible position, she treats it as some kind of manipulation that she's got to overcome with force. She follows the same pattern in Bethic Twinstinct when Space Beth returns for Thanksgiving. She makes her return to Earth with the confidence of a rebellious teen who finally moved out and got a haircut just to spite her parents. The build-up shows her systematically working to prove her superiority over regular Beth while desperately seeking validation for her life choices. The climactic moment of Space Beth's emotional dysfunction comes during her romantic involvement with regular Beth. Her relationship with Beth starts to develop after they bond over a bottle of Venusian wine after the dinner. Space Beth encourages Beth to be the kind of person she wants to be and not hold back, pointing out they can tell each other anything. What follows reveals the depth of Space Beth's psychological isolation by literally dating herself because they're the same person and no one else understands them. The beautiful tragedy here shows exactly how Space Beth operates. She cuts out the middleman and dates a version of herself who already knows the script. She tells herself it's love, but Space Beth chose the most emotionally safe partner imaginable and called it freedom. While Space Beth wants to take their relationship seriously, Beth still has feelings for Jerry and wants to stay with her family. Space Beth's response to that showed just how unstable she can get when she's rejected. And so, she becomes territorial, starts insulting Jerry, and pressures Beth to abandon her life. But after Jerry figures out that his wife is having an affair with her alternate self, Space Beth shows her inability to process complex emotional situations. She continues to belittle him throughout Bethic Twinstinct and encourages Beth to leave him permanently, showing no regard for his feelings on their relationship. She then went on to accuse him of being upset that it's about him, calling him a pervert when she finds out he enjoys watching them make out. But then something unexpected happens. She realizes that she's aroused by him, permitting it before having him join in. We all know what happens next. Space Beth's reaction to this resolution demonstrates her fundamental confusion about what she actually wants. Rather than recognizing this as a healthy compromise that allows everyone to get their needs met, she processes it as another victory in her ongoing competition with regular Beth. She can be heard saying she knows what Jerry likes, treating intimacy like another skill to master rather than a connection to experience. The aftermath reveals Space Beth's core problem. She treats discomfort like a threat. When emotional situations become complex or ambiguous, she either freezes or redirects into aggression. She'd rather fire a laser than admit she's lost. Space Beth's pattern of using motion to avoid reflecting creates cascading problems across all her relationships. For someone who constantly criticizes her father, Space Beth spends a suspicious amount of time trying to impress him. She acts detached when Rick doesn't recognize her, shrugging off his indifference like it doesn't sting. But the more time they spend together, the more obvious it becomes that Space Beth wants Rick to validate her decision to leave. She wants him to say she's the real one, or the better one, or the daughter he should have raised. Rick never gives her that validation. He avoids choosing. So Space Beth lashes out in subtler ways. She challenges his logic, competes with his tech, and flaunts her independence while hoping he'll chase her. For all her rebellion, she's still stuck in the same emotional orbit as regular Beth. She claims to be happy with her life and claims to have found purpose, but the moment she's back around her family, all of that starts to fade away. She becomes jealous of Beth's connection with the kids. She becomes territorial about Jerry, and in later episodes, she openly competes for affection and attention because she can't stand the idea of being the other Beth. In reality, she still wants the same things as her clone: to be loved, to be needed, and to matter more than Rick ever let her. She acts like she moved past her trauma, but in reality, she just weaponized it. In Star Mort Rick Turn of the Jerry, she immediately assumes the worst about Rick's intentions and treats every situation like a battle to be won rather than a problem to be solved. Her approach to the Galactic Federation demonstrates this pattern perfectly. Rather than seeking diplomatic solutions or understanding the political complexities involved, Space Beth throws herself into rebellion as another form of motion. The longer she avoids self-reflection, the more reckless she becomes. Her adventures grow increasingly Star Wars-y, as Rick puts it, suggesting she's falling into familiar patterns rather than growth. When leaving the family behind in Bethic Twinstinct, she promises to look out for her grandson. But this gesture reveals her fundamental misunderstanding of connection. She wants the emotional benefits of family relationships without the vulnerability that makes them meaningful. Space Beth represents the most dangerous kind of wasted potential of someone brilliant enough to solve complex tactical problems, but too emotionally stunted to recognize that her real enemy is herself. Her intelligence could be her salvation, but she's unwilling to stop running long enough to face herself, and all that intelligence will keep circling the same destructive patterns. Space Beth's estimated IQ, 125. Despite having a strong problem-solving ability and adaptive intelligence in emergency situations, she is unable to use this intelligence for personal development. She's trapped emotionally with validation issues, similar to the next character. But she inherited the best parts of both Beth's and can pretty much adapt to any situation. Summer Smith. Beth's firstborn child often gets overlooked in the family hierarchy because she's not a genius, not a scientist, and not traditionally powerful. But she makes up for it with adaptability. When things fall apart, Summer pivots. She plays along, adjusts quickly, and finds her place in the chaos. While she's often the most emotionally grounded person in the room, her judgment tends to collapse the moment Rick gets involved because she too wants his approval. Like her mom, she wants to be useful. And in trying to earn that, she sometimes sacrifices the self-awareness that makes her strong. Summer operates just below genius level but well above average. She's emotionally literate, socially perceptive, and fast on her feet. She picks up new systems quickly, learns from mistakes, and shows more long-term growth than nearly anyone in the show. But her intelligence shines when she's on her own. When she's orbiting someone like Rick, it gets buried under her insecurities, which she inherited from her mother. Although Summer is not as scientifically gifted as her grandfather, she's still shown to be a very smart and nimble teen, at least compared to the rest of her family. But she's also sociopathic and narcissistic, like her grandfather, similar to the way that Morty responds, but only when truly pushed to his limits. Summer, however, seems more readily able to access these elements of her personality when subjected to her grandfather Rick's influence for a relatively short amount of time. Summer has shown consistently that she handles crises better than anyone else in her family. She has street smarts that the others lack. She picks up on social dynamics quickly. She reads rooms and shifts the tone depending on who she's dealing with. And when her back's against the wall, she steps up more confidently than Morty or Rick for that matter. The perfect example of her intelligent crisis management can be seen in The Ricks Must Be Crazy, when Rick and Morty travel inside the car's battery to fix it and leave Summer waiting in the car, instructing it to keep Summer safe. Things take a turn when Rick's car starts using extreme defensive tactics to protect Summer from different situations, which horrifies her, as the car's interpretation of keeping her safe involves brutal harm. In this episode, a man approaches Summer and starts banging on the window, demanding she get out, but the car extends an arm from the back and cuts him into cubes with a laser. Summer's immediate reaction shows her moral compass because she doesn't get amused and gets horrified instead. The situation escalates when more people get involved, leading to a full military standoff. To clarify, Rick's car is fully capable of destroying anything in its path, but when Summer forbid it from causing violence, it didn't do anything. Summer has unique problem-solving abilities when she's under pressure, because she didn't accept the car's violent solutions and negotiated with the AI to come up with less lethal security measures. She actually became the moral center of the entire episode just by staying calm and thinking. This represents her core strength. She becomes the most reasonable person in the room when no one's looking. This demonstrates Summer's unique intelligence. The car creates a peace treaty between humans and telepathic giant spiders that were in an active war in return for guaranteed safety. But when Rick and Morty return, they go for ice cream and Rick starts complaining that his ice cream is full of flies, to which the waitress responds by saying that it's because of the presidential peace treaty. And so, Rick starts to berate Summer for ruining ice cream. This aftermath captures Summer's position in the family. She solves complex problems with creativity and moral integrity, but gets blamed for the consequences that follow. Her intelligence worked flawlessly in the crisis, but she receives no credit for preventing a war or saving countless lives. Summer's pattern of intelligent crisis management followed by approval seeking creates cascading problems across her relationships. In Rickmancing the Stone, while Morty grieves their parents' divorce, Summer throws herself into a Mad Max-style apocalypse. She takes on a warlord boyfriend, adapts to a kill-or-be-killed society, and thrives. But her confidence comes more from denial than strength. She uses the wasteland to bury her feelings, a lot like Space Beth. She wants to feel big in a place where everything is savage and meaningless. That way, she doesn't have to think about home or the fact that her family just exploded and nobody asked how she's doing. Rick doesn't stop her, but encourages it because he likes when people become extensions of him. Summer's intelligence gets consistently undermined by her need for validation from the worst people. In The ABCs of Beth, she gets into a petty argument with Morty over who Rick likes more, then risks her life just to win the competition. In Big Trouble in Little Sanchez, she helps clone Rick into a younger version of himself without considering what that might unleash. These decisions reveal Summer's fundamental contradiction. She's smart enough to know when she's being used, but in the moment, her need to be seen is stronger than her judgment. She doesn't want control. She wants proof that she matters, that she's more than just the background sibling. Her relationship with Rick demonstrates how her intelligence gets corrupted by his influence. Wet Kuata Mortican Summer shows how Summer does Rick's chores to get what she wants. In the beginning of the episode, she receives an attribute slider as payment for cleaning up his mess. Later on, Summer expresses her disappointment because Morty gets everything for free. Rick's response reveals his manipulative understanding of Summer's psychology. Rick then explains that Morty's a dog and people have cats as their affection is earned. This dynamic keeps Summer trapped in a cycle where her intelligence serves Rick's needs rather than her own development. When Summer leads without Rick's interference, things actually work. She has consistently shown that she handles crises better than anyone else in her family. In episodes like Raising Gazorpazorp and Promortius, she ends up being the one who navigates foreign civilizations, negotiates truces, or gets Morty and Rick out alive. In Raising Gazorpazorp, after being dismissed because of Rick's sexism, Summer is granted the perfect opportunity to prove her capability. Accompanying him on a mission to a matriarchal planet, Summer is able to take charge with Rick being forced to pose as her slave, and she manages to save both their lives when the situation goes south. By integrating into the matriarchal society with ease and knowing how to effectively communicate with the alien women when she and Rick are to be executed, Summer establishes herself as an extremely useful companion for Rick. But these successes get overshadowed by her need for his ongoing approval. Summer's strength comes with a cost. She's always reacting, always adapting to other people's chaos instead of creating her own path. She doesn't initiate as much as she survives. Her intelligence manifests in emotional literacy and social perception that surpasses most of her family. She reads social dynamics quickly, adapts her communication style, and maintains moral clarity under pressure. But these skills get buried under insecurity when she's trying to impress people who don't deserve her effort. Summer Smith's estimated IQ, 115. Above average intelligence with strong emotional and social intelligence, but her need for validation and approval-seeking behavior prevents her from fully utilizing her considerable capabilities. She might survive anything, but that doesn't mean she makes good decisions. And the people above her just rewrite the rules. Tap subscribe if you're ready for the characters who actually break the system. Summer represents the most wasted potential in the Smith family because she's too focused on external validation to develop her abilities. This also applies to the next character, who follows the same patterns. But the difference is he's emotionally dependent on Rick, and that prevents his intelligence from evolving. Morty Smith. Morty is one of television's most compelling character evolutions, who transformed from Rick's helpless sidekick into a genuinely capable partner that's always undermining his own growth through desperate needs for validation and love. Morty started off as the weakest link that was always overwhelmed and barely capable of keeping up with Rick's world. But unlike most characters in the show, Morty evolves. He gets sharper, He questions Rick more. He learns from mistakes, even if the lessons come with permanent trauma. You can chart his growth season by season, and by the time newer episodes roll around, he's no longer the helpless tag-along. He's a partner. Not always a good one, but a partner nonetheless. Still, even as his intelligence rises, Morty stays vulnerable to emotion. He wants to be loved, respected, and understood. He wants people to think he's capable. And when those needs get triggered, his logic collapses. The difference now is, when he fails, it's because he ignores what he already knows. Morty's weakness for emotional validation shows up constantly, but nowhere is it more obvious than in how quickly he falls in love with almost anyone who shows him kindness. In Rick Potion number 9, he asks Rick to help him win Jessica's affection. The potion goes wrong, mutates the entire planet, and eventually leads to the creation of a post-apocalyptic hellscape filled with Cronenbergs. Rick and Morty abandon their original dimension altogether. Morty literally has to bury a version of himself in the backyard. You'd think that experience would teach him to stop chasing validation from crushes, but the cycle repeats in the Vat of Acid episode, where Morty uses a reality reset button to perfect romantic encounters, only to end up destroying thousands of lives and timelines just to keep a relationship going. Morty's relationship with Rick is a constant tug-of-war between reverence and resentment. He knows Rick is brilliant, but he also knows Rick is manipulative, selfish, and often emotionally abusive. Morty swings back and forth, idolizing Rick in one moment, rebelling in the next. In the Vat of Acid episode, Morty openly challenges Rick's logic, mocks his methods, and demands respect. Rick retaliates by humiliating Morty with a twisted lesson in consequences. Morty needed to push back, but the mistake was assuming Rick would play fair. Morty forgets that Rick doesn't believe in equal footing, and every time Morty gets close to outgrowing him, Rick knocks him back down. As the series progresses, Morty starts showing flashes of real tactical thinking. He becomes better at assessing danger, planning escapes, and managing high-stakes decisions. In One Crew Over the Cuckoo's Morty, he becomes self-aware enough to deconstruct an entire genre of heist narratives by outthinking every move, seeing through manipulation, and ultimately walking away from the chaos knowing how stupid it all was. Despite everything he's learned, Morty still collapses the moment he feels important. His desire to be special, stronger, smarter, or loved overtakes his logic the moment it's within reach. In a Rick Convenient Mort, Morty finds himself in an intense relationship with Planetina, a literal elemental superhero. At first, he's happy he's dating someone powerful, someone who validates him. But when Planetina becomes dangerous, Morty defends her blindly. He fights his family, refuses to let go, and even helps her commit crimes. It's the same mistake he made with Jessica, with Unity, with everyone. Morty substitutes emotional connection for critical thinking, and when that connection cracks, the fallout is catastrophic for everyone around him. The tragedy is that Morty knows what he's capable of. He's just not ready to let go of being liked. Morty started around the 95 to 100 IQ range as a nervous, reactive, and slow-to-process character. But by the most recent seasons, he's working closer to 115, maybe even 120 on a good day. He learns, he adapts, and grows in ways other characters don't. Morty Smith's estimated IQ, 95 to 120. Rapidly evolving intelligence with strong pattern recognition and tactical thinking. But emotional dependency and validation seeking consistently undermine his growth and potential. He's not dumb, he's just not free yet. The biggest proof of that comes from Evil Morty, the version of him that fully broke away from Rick, formed his own ideology, and exposed the terrifying truths behind the central finite curve. Evil Morty is what happens when Morty doesn't crave Rick's approval, and that's what we're getting into next. Evil Morty. Morty's alternate self may not be the smartest person in the room, but he's the one who built the room, rigged it, trapped everyone inside it, and walked away without any remorse. He's a very calculated character, and unlike regular Morty, who swings between growth and regression depending on how Rick treats him, Evil Morty doesn't need Rick's approval. In fact, his entire existence is built on rejecting it. Everything about him, from his tone to his tactics, suggests long-term planning. He doesn't monologue unless it serves a purpose. He doesn't get personal unless it gives him leverage. And while we haven't seen the full scope of his endgame yet, the steps we have seen already place him far above every other Morty and most Ricks. Evil Morty represents the ultimate evolution of what happens when a Morty completely breaks free from Rick's psychological control. Where regular Morty still craves validation and struggles with emotional dependency, Evil Morty has achieved something far more dangerous: complete emotional detachment from the systems that define everyone else's existence. Evil Morty's first appearance in Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind set the tone for who he really is. A version of Morty who's not interested in dominating people, but in manipulating systems. He hides behind a brainwashed evil Rick, stages fake evidence to frame another Rick, and lets the multiverse do the dirty work. While everyone's chasing decoys, Evil Morty blends into the background, writing code that allows him to escape detection. The genius of his initial plan was the misdirection. While every Rick was focused on finding the mastermind, they completely overlooked the possibility that a Morty could be orchestrating everything. Their own opinions became their blind spot, and Evil Morty exploited that perfectly. When Evil Morty returns in the Ricklantis mix-up, he's not an outsider anymore. He's embedded himself in the Citadel's political system as Candidate Morty, who's running for president in a Morty-only election. This time, he outmaneuvered Rick in practically every version of himself. He wins by pretending to be moderate, by pretending to care about the poor, by promising hope in a broken Morty-class system that was designed to be hopeless. But the second he takes power, he executes every opposing faction, including the Ricks who supported him. Evil Morty's campaign was about access, and once he had that access, he pressed a button that everyone else was too afraid to touch. The presidential election revealed that Evil Morty has a terrifying quality about him, which was his ability to understand and manipulate hope itself. He knew exactly what desperate Mortys wanted to hear, delivered it in convincing fashion, then used their trust to gain the power necessary for his real agenda. In Rick Mirai Jack, Evil Morty reveals his greatest achievement. He discovered the existence of the central finite curve, the multiversal firewall that separates universes where Rick is the smartest man from ones where he isn't. He exposed Rick's entire ideology in one move, destroying the story he had built around himself. The genius of it was the motivation. Evil Morty wanted to escape the machine Rick built to protect his own ego and dismantle the lie that Ricks are inevitable and Mortys are disposable. Most Ricks are obsessed with being at the center of the universe, and Evil Morty just wanted out, so he found the means to do so and escape through the central finite curve. This was him choosing to leave the system entirely, while everyone else fights over scraps of power within Rick's system. What makes Evil Morty so dangerous is his emotional control, because he never flinches under pressure, much like Space Beth. He sees other Mortys trying to rebel but still chasing validation. He sees Ricks trying to control everything but falling apart the moment their authority is questioned. Evil Morty stays detached from all of it. He understands what the universe is and doesn't waste time pretending it can be changed from within. That kind of clarity requires more than brains. It requires a total rejection of the roles other characters cling to. Evil Morty stopped being a Morty the moment he realized the game was rigged and never looked back once he escaped. The most unsettling thing about Evil Morty is that we still don't know what he's really after. After crossing into the wider multiverse, he doesn't deliver a victory speech or reveal a master plan. He just walks away, and that means his next move could come from anywhere at any time. Other characters want attention, revenge, or validation. Evil Morty wants freedom, and the only reason we haven't seen him since is because he doesn't need us to. Evil Morty is the rare character who truly transcends the show's power structure. He's not a Morty that's a reflection of Rick's flaws. He's an anomaly that proves intelligence isn't about tech. Evil Morty's estimated IQ, 140 to 145. exceptional strategic intelligence with perfect emotional control and systems thinking, but his true power comes from his complete rejection of the psychological dependencies that limit everyone else. He hijacked the Citadel, exposed Rick's whole belief system, and walked away without flinching, and he's still not number one. Hit subscribe because the only person left is the reason this list exists. Evil Morty comes closest in terms of philosophical awareness, but Rick still outclasses him in raw intellect, tech ability, and multiversal dominance. Rick is the ceiling. Everyone else is just figuring out how to survive under it. Rick Sanchez. There's no debate, Rick Sanchez is the smartest character in the multiverse. No one invents faster, improvises better, or understands more about reality than he does. He builds time-freezing crystals out of trash. He upgrades planets like apps. He outwits cosmic gods, time cops, and other versions of himself on a weekly basis. If intelligence were measured purely by processing power, Rick would be off the charts. But intelligence isn't judgment. It's not wisdom. It's not stability. And that's where Rick collapses, over and over again. His mind is unmatched, but his emotional maturity hasn't evolved past a bored teenager. He doesn't grow and alienates everyone who tries to love him. And no matter how often his plans succeed, the results always end up hollow, self-destructive, or worse. He's the smartest man in the universe, and he uses that intelligence to sabotage everything. Rick doesn't want to be understood. He wants to be obeyed. That's why he surrounds himself with weaker versions of himself, less competent Mortys, and family members too traumatized to challenge him. He calls it freedom, but it's all about control. The clearest example of this is the central finite curve, a multiversal filter Rick helped create to isolate realities where he's always the smartest person alive. He did it to avoid ever being questioned, essentially reshaping infinity to protect his ego. And then, once he built that structure, he locked himself inside it and convinced himself it was a throne, but it was a cage. Rick tends to cling to the only parts of it that make him feel superior, which is fear dressed up as brilliance. Rick prides himself on being above sentiment. He treats emotions like viruses that are dangerous if not eliminated. But that philosophy doesn't make him rational. It makes him dangerous. For reference, he transforms himself into a literal pickle, just to avoid therapy in Pickle Rick. Then he survives an entire sewer system using rats and recycled organs, crashes into a government black site, and defeats an entire paramilitary squad just to prove he didn't need help. He risked death, torture, and international conflict rather than face a conversation about his own behavior, which many may categorize as pathology. Rick's problem is that he resents other people for having them. He mocks Morty for caring, manipulates Beth's need for approval, and weaponizes Summer's loyalty. And when anyone gets too close, he either abandons them or pushes them away with cruelty. In his eyes, people are functions. Morty is a buffer against the Council. Beth is a failed clone experiment. Jerry is comic relief. Even Bird Person, his only real friend, gets used as a pawn in Rick's broader story. In The Wedding Squanchers, Rick tries to keep his distance, warns the group not to go to the wedding, and then acts surprised when things go bad. But when Tammy reveals herself as a Galactic Federation agent and kills Bird Person, Rick just runs instead of mourning his only friend. After Mr. Poopy Butthole, of course. Rick has access to infinite timelines, endless resets, and more power than any mortal being should, but he drinks himself unconscious, tortures versions of himself, sabotages peace, and kills gods. Then complains about it later because that's just how he's wired. In Edge of Tomorty, Rick Die Rickpeat, he dies dozens of times across realities, waking up in clone bodies and immediately rejecting each one for being not Rick enough. He can't even tolerate alternate versions of himself because they challenge the illusion that he's the default. In the Rickshank Redemption, he dismantles the Galactic Federation and the Citadel in one move because he's mad about a condiment. He literally ends intergalactic order over Szechuan sauce, and he frames the entire thing as a personal mission. Every time Rick reaches a plateau of influence or peace, He wrecks it, and it's because he hates the feeling of stillness, since chaos keeps him feeling alive. And when it's not there, he creates it. His genius just gives him bigger tools to bury his emotions instead of protecting him from them. In Rick Mirai Jack, we finally see Rick's backstory. His original wife and daughter were murdered by another Rick, and that was when he decided to spend decades building tech, traveling dimensions, and hunting that version down. It's the origin he never shared and the one that explains his obsession with control. But once Rick finds his enemy, he joins him instead of killing him, builds the Citadel, and becomes a part of the same system that caused him pain. This is where Rick's intelligence betrays him most. He knows what hurt him and knows what he became. But instead of stopping the cycle, he reinforces it, spreads it, and becomes the Rick other Ricks fear by choice. He tells himself it's the only way to survive. But the truth is, he doesn't know who he'd be without the pain. So he keeps it close, even when it devours him. Later, when he resurrects Bird Person in Rickternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, it's not about healing a friendship. It's about fixing a loose end. Evil Morty comes closest in terms of philosophical awareness and strategic independence, but Rick still outclasses him in raw intellect, tech ability, and multiversal dominance, and his IQ is off the charts. Easily 170 or higher, possibly beyond measurable limits. He's an inventor, strategist, physicist, linguist, and universe-hopping tactician with virtually no equal. He outsmarts gods, dismantles civilizations, and rewrites reality like it's nothing. But none of that has made him wise. In fact, the smarter he gets, the more emotionally stunted he becomes. No amount of intelligence can break the cycles of self-destruction he is caught in because of his refusal to process grief, his control issues that undermine trust, and his arrogance that replaces caution. He's proof that being the smartest person in the room means nothing if you can't figure out how to be happy in it. His emotional stunting and self-destructive tendencies turn his gifts into weapons against his own happiness. He built a multiverse that bends to his will, but no amount of power has ever made him whole. Some of these characters evolved, some collapsed, but every single one proved that intelligence alone doesn't mean you make smart choices. Every character in Rick and Morty is fighting their own brain just as much as the world around them. And no matter how high they climb, they all find new ways to fall. If you're into this kind of breakdown, hit subscribe.